I think that's where if you have expertise and knowledge like you do, and the hard part about people like us and anybody who's listening to this or watching this and is an expert in some area, all of us take our own wisdom kind of for granted because it's second nature to us. So when I talk to somebody about a podcast, I have, ideas and thoughts and strategies, and it just comes, it comes as naturally to me as, putting my seatbelt on when I sit in a car. It's just what I do. But to somebody who doesn't have that experience and that knowledge, those are little like nuggets. Those are like, gold bars or Easter eggs filled with the best candy. So if you can come up with a way to take the stuff that seems basic and obvious to you and put it into a 5 to 10 minute podcast episode, you're going to have a huge audience for that.
Well, hey there. Welcome to Media Savvy, the podcast that gives you a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to get noticed by media and become the go-to expert that they keep coming back to. I'll be sitting down with successful writers, producers, and entrepreneurs to learn the tools and tactics they use to build their reputation and in turn boost their business. I'm your host, Taub-Dix, and I've been working with top-tier media outlets for more than 30 years, anywhere from traditional print publications to online and social platforms. And I'm sharing my nutrition guidance without gimmicks. But you don't have to be a dietitian for this podcast to speak to you. Through my one-to-one conversations, you'll learn how to build a strategy to get your name in the news and establish yourself as an authority in your field, no matter what the industry. With Media Savvy, I'm on a mission to inspire, motivate, and empower you to have the confidence and tools you need to shine in the spotlight. Are you ready? Let's get Media Savvy. Hello there, Media Savvy friends. Welcome to another episode of the Media Savvy podcast. I am your host, Taub-Dix. And if you've listened to the show before, well, today's episode is going to take your podcast thinking to a whole new level. And if you're new here, this is exactly the kind of conversation that we have every episode. So you may want to hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss what's coming up next. Either way, make yourself comfortable and get ready to meet Jeff Dauler.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, I am so happy to have you here. And I know that my listeners have expertise and I know that they have the message, but if you have a podcast, the question is, does your podcast have strategy? And today, Jeff, who calls himself a podcast architect, and you'll see why he does that, he helps creators and brands design shows that build authority and not just downloads. So if you're serious about podcasting, you'll definitely want to listen to this. So Jeff, before we talk about podcast strategy, let's talk about you. What drew you into this world in the first place? And did you work in media in particular, like in radio, or did you or did something just inspire you?
Now, my radio career started properly when I transferred to Syracuse University. So I grew up in Syracuse and I did my first year of college in a different city and then came back to Syracuse and was going to be living with my parents. So I had to find some activities to do, right? So I could find some friends. I wouldn't be in the dorms. So I went to the, beginning of the semester activity thing and signed up to work at the college radio station because the girl who was working the booth was really cute. So I
always start somewhere.
Right. And I had no real interest in radio before that. So it wasn't like a calling. I wasn't one of those guys who did, fake radio shows in their basement or anything. I just needed a way to make friends in college. So I signed up for the college radio station and a couple of things happened. One, that girl and I dated for a little while, but we broke up. But two, I started working at the college radio station. And when everybody went home for the summer, I was one of about 10 people still keeping the radio station on the air because I lived in Syracuse. And I got an opportunity to do everything. I got an opportunity to be on the air, to be part of the morning show, to do PR behind the scenes, to do sales, to do all the stuff. And it was really a super advanced education in radio broadcasting. So I ended up dropping out of college to take a job at a radio station, and just kept moving up in the radio world. So I managed to work in radio for 25 years before I got fired for the first time, and then got let go in 2019 and said, look, I've got a whole bunch of, money coming out. I was in the middle of a contract, so I still had paychecks coming in, and I was tired of I always worked in morning shows. So I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning. I said, let me just try my hand at this podcasting thing. I had started my own podcast in 2016. And so my wife and I launched a show together, and it ended up taking off better than we ever expected. So over the next few years, we just helped other people start their podcast. We found this lane that we're in right now, helping brands and founders and people, like you said, who have expertise and have knowledge that they need to get in the world. We help them find their voice and help them find their audience. And my wife left her job. She worked was working for CNN at the time, and she's worked in music management. So we have a really unique skill set that we have used to build this company.
So you have answered the question of why you call yourself the podcast architect, because now I see why. I think that's such a fabulous story, and it just goes to show that you have to do the work. Working at the radio station, you learned your skills, you had confidence in yourself. And then where that took you from there. It's really the foundation of just about everything that we do, especially in working with media. But you really had such a strong foundation in working with radio. So you knew the intricacies of making a podcast and making it work.
Yeah, I think I really had to, when I was in radio, it just came naturally to me. Entertaining people and finding an audience was something that it was definitely what I was meant to do. And I just was really good at it. But while I was in radio, I never had to kind of distill the science behind it. And since moving to podcasting, I've had to really break down what I learned in radio and how that translates to podcasting. So I didn't realize how much I was learning at the time. And now after the fact, I'm so grateful for all that experience in radio, because it really was a 360 degree, education.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, I find the same was with my background in media. I just did it. And I didn't really think about what I was doing. I just did it. And then when you would do it and it really felt good and you knew you connected with people, it's like, all right, I want to do that again. But now that I'm doing this podcast and writing a book about working with media, I think that it makes you really think about what you're doing instead of just doing it. And that's actually not easy, but I think, but we're in the same place. So when it comes to actually wanting to start a podcast, what's the very first thing that you would encourage someone to think about before they just, hit record with that first session? What do you really need to do to just get started and think about doing this?
The beautiful thing and the terrible thing about podcasting is it's so easy to get started, right? So you can go to Amazon, buy a microphone, have it at your house, sometimes the same day, and be podcasting within 24 hours, which is wonderful. But it's also terrible because a lot of people launch without really understanding why they're launching. And so our first three questions to every person we work with, whether they're a client, whether it's a friend who hits us up at a, neighborhood block party who says, I've been thinking about a podcast, or anyone really, the first three questions we always ask are why do you want to start a podcast? What are your goals? What's the outcome that you want to get? Because very few people want to have a podcast. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all be Joe Rogan and Call Her Daddy and Mel Robbins and Dax Shepard and have that money, coming in and that level of fame and getting nominated for Golden Globe Awards. Now I think Golden Globes have podcast categories. So, but very few people want to create that. Most people just want to talk to a certain audience and fill a need. And at the end of the day, most of the people we talk to, it's money, right? So they want to get more clients. They want to sell more books. They want to speak on more stages. They want to increase their professional reputation and their professional profile. So the first question is why? Get really, really, precise on the why you want to start a podcast. If you want to start a podcast because you're a coach or a consultant or a media trainer and you want to get more clients, write down exactly how many clients, right? I want to get one new client every quarter from my podcast. If you have a book that you want to promote, I want 25,000 people to know about my book, right? I want to reach an audience of 25,000. Get really precise with your goal. Then step 2 is, who is your audience, right? So who do you want to know about your book? Who hires you? Be really specific. Don't just say, people in the beauty industry, but say people who have growing businesses that are trying to expand their reputation by doing TV appearances. Like, get really precise. And then finally, figure out what action that audience, that's question 2, what action does the answer to question 2 have to take in order to get the goal that you identified in question 1? So buy a book, recommend you to a friend, spread the word, hire you as a client. And then once you have those 3 answers, then you start building your podcast. What we see all too often, and most of our clients right now are people who've all started podcasts in the past, and they do it, I call it Joe Rogan style. Okay, he's the most successful podcaster. What's he do? He releases an episode every week. He interviews people. They're long episodes. That's what I got to do. For 99 out of 100 of us, that's not what you got to do. Treat your podcast like a book. If you're working on a book project, how many chapters are in your book? Most people can do a podcast season or series based on how many chapters they would have in their book. If you just turn the mic on and start talking with a plan to release an episode every Tuesday for the rest of your life, 6 months from now, you're going to be frustrated because it's not going to be delivering results and your audience is going to go down. So that's the starting point, is identify the why and the who, and then connect those 2 dots.
Okay, if I could put what you just said in a snippet, that would be what I would put on my Instagram and every place else I was promoting this podcast, because I hope that if you're listening, you hear how important that is, because you could have a message, you could have all the equipment, you could have confidence and motivation, but who you're talking to, like, you really need to know who you're talking to and who you're helping, because otherwise, you feel like you're just helping yourself with this podcast, but it's really reaching out to people. And I think that, you really hit something that is so important. And I say it all the time when it comes to working with media, which is speak the language of your audience.
Right.
And you have to know who your audience is. If you're talking over their heads, you're talking beneath them, you need to talk to them, but you really have to maybe even do a little bit of research about who you even want to listen to your show. And you also, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and you have to be really clear on who that person is as it relates to your goal. Because if you're doing, like in your case, if your client's doing a media appearance because they want, more clients, but they never in that media appearance say something to the effect of, we're always looking for new clients or anything along that, then that message could get totally lost, and there's always ways that you can slip in what you want people to do without blatantly saying, hey, I'd love to work with you. I want to be a new client, so it's just so important to know the who you're talking to and the what you want them to do, and to say that with as little friction as possible every time you do a podcast episode. If not, you'll find yourself spinning your wheels and your podcast will never get traction.
When you say with as little friction, What do you mean by as little friction?
I learned in my radio career that everybody who's listening to something is also doing 5 other things. Nobody sits down and listens to a podcast the same way they would study a college textbook, right? You don't have 100% of people's attention. So you have to, even the brand of your podcast, you have to tell people who your podcast is for, right? In plain English, and why it exists every single episode, because you want them to feel at home, right? So my default for whenever I talk to clients is always pizza. So if your podcast is about pizza and your goal is to help everybody who's listening make the most delicious homemade pizza they've ever made, then you need to say at the beginning of every episode, welcome to the Pizza Podcast. Every single episode, I get you 1 or 2 steps closer to making the most delicious homemade pizza you've ever made. And you say that, it's going to be, in radio, we used to joke that by the time we got sick of a song that we were playing on the radio, the audience was just starting to get familiar with it, because you've got to expose people to it over and over and over again. So if you're doing a pizza podcast, you say, every single episode, I'm going to get you 1 or 2 steps closer to making the most delicious homemade pizza you've ever made. And you take away any friction to make them wonder. I'm not a fan of the shows that put no context clips. And I always get nervous saying this, because if you're one of these people, it doesn't mean you have a bad podcast. But when you put a no context clip at the beginning of your episode, you're creating friction, because it's a puzzle that I need to solve. And if I'm a fan of yours, I might be willing to give you the energy to solve that puzzle. If I've never before listened to your show, I don't have time for your games. You tell me exactly what I'm going to get out of this episode. Hey, thanks for listening to the Pizza Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the proper way to prepare mozzarella to go on top of your pizza.
And tomorrow's burrata.
Yeah, right. And that's it. And then, hey, welcome to the Pizza Podcast. If you're not a fan of Chicago style pizza, skip this episode, because we're going all in on making the perfect Chicago style pizza. That's what this episode is about. Well,
I have to say, I'm not changing the name of my podcast to the Pizza Podcast. However, I do want to say that something you said really hit me, and that's that. And we'll get to a question about metrics, because I really want to know about what you think about metrics. But sometimes I might look at the people who subscribe to my show, or numbers I'm talking about, or YouTube or whatever. And I feel like, really, I just thought it was going to be a lot higher than that by now, but okay, whatever. And then I'll go to a convention and people will come up to me and actually quote things from my podcast.
Yes.
Or I'll have someone.
And that's what matters. That's the metric.
And it just surprises me. It just surprises me, because I don't know who's listening, and they may not be subscribing, but they may be listening every time a new episode comes out, because I promote it. So then they'd see it. And I think that that's really what makes the difference. And that's where your audience doesn't have to be gigantic, but it needs to be your audience, your people who you could connect with.
If your goal with the Pizza Podcast is to get 100 people every year to buy your $25 pizza at home kit, right? Like, that's your goal. You don't need 10,000 people listening to your show who don't like pizza. You just need 100 people listening to your show who are so devoted to pizza. And that's why it's so important to start with the goal, because that's how you define your metric, not how many people overall are listening to your show. There's services out there. I could take any podcast in the country, and for $100, buy them 10,000 downloads. Not one of those people will convert to a long, time listener or fan of the show. Maybe 1 or 2 of them will, but for the most part, now you've got 10,000 downloads, but who cares? Because they're not people who are ever going to move the needle for you. So the metric that you just mentioned is the one that matters. Are the people that you're trying to reach engaging with you, coming up to you at events, sending you DMs, sharing the show on social media, sending you an email when you ask for it? Are they responding in a way that makes it feel like you're talking to the right audience? That's the metric that counts.
Yeah. So, but when it comes to something like downloads or other metrics, what really does matter if you want to look at those numbers? What should hosts be paying attention to when they look at their metrics?
I try to discourage everybody from looking at their metrics because they're so the systems of which they're measured, it's just a flawed system. So if somebody was insistent, that the thing that I think is most important is the percentage, how long people are listening to the episode. So you want to see on an audio podcast, you want to see, because it's an average number. So you want to see that number to be over 80%. Now, that doesn't mean most people are listening to 80% of your episode. That means most of them are probably listening to 100%. And then you have a few people who get 5 minutes in and the baby wakes up, or, lunch, somebody comes into the break room and you're going to have lunch with somebody that you weren't. So you shut it off and that drives the number down. But the length of time people listening, that to me tells the biggest story, because once somebody comes in, it's not that difficult to keep them in. If your number is dropping off at 40, 50, 60%, your episodes are either too long or you're not great at being a podcaster. So you want to try to solve that mystery and get that number up. Now, it's important to say this. This is for an audio only podcast, because this number for video podcast is so much lower, because what happens on YouTube is your podcast might pop up and somebody, might not be it pops up. It's the discoverability is different. So it could pop up and then people are like, oh, I don't have time for a 30-minute podcast episode, and they skip away. It's not a judgment on the quality of the show or the quality of the content. It's just not a good metric to use on video. But that's the only one that I would follow on audio. And then the other one is you got to make up a metric. You got to give yourself, this is why I said be really precise in your goals. You should set a simple goal and say, I want 5 new email addresses every week from my podcast. And that means you have to put a lead magnet in your podcast, or put some reason for people to email you. Or I want 5 new followers on Instagram from my podcast. Or I want 5 LinkedIn comments from my podcast. And that's what you track, because now you're meeting in the real world a name and a person and a face that's a podcast listener. And now you can start to build a community and build a relationship with them.
Right. And that, ripple in the water is what really surprisingly builds podcasts, yes. Builds your brand so much. And yep. Jeff also has an amazing newsletter, and he doesn't overwhelm you. And I just signed up for it, and I really have enjoyed reading it. And some of your newsletters confirm what I already knew, which makes me feel good about that. And others mention something that's just new. And I'll link to his newsletter in the show notes. But I love something that you wrote in one of your newsletters, and you called it Winning with One. And your idea is that your goal is to win one person's attention for 5 minutes, one thought, one person, one win. Can you unpack that a little bit? And how does your mindset change the way that someone would promote their show?
So I think this was originally born when I would see people post on LinkedIn and it would say new episode alert. And then it would say a new episode of the Pizza Podcast just dropped. And then it would list like 8 different bullets of things that were talked about in the podcast. So it would be, our guest was Bonnie and she loves, Chicago style, pizza. So she told us about her 3 favorite restaurants in Chicago with pizza. Then we talked about sauce. Do you add sugar or not? And then we talked about, do you bake on a stone or a steel? And then we talked about, and you list all these things. There are 0 people on the planet right now who have the bandwidth to process that much information. Because if you give people that much information, they're not going to engage with your content unless 100% of those boxes applies to them. And so the better way to win one person is to take your podcast episode. And if those are the 8 topics, then you have 8 individual social media posts that you can use. And if every single one of those reaches just 5 people, you've just reached 40 listeners, right? So one of them is going to say, what are the best 3 pizza restaurants in Chicago? Bonnie lived there for 10 years and shares her picks in the first 5 minutes of this episode right here. Click it. So now anybody who's traveling to Chicago or anybody who lives in Chicago and has an opinion on pizza might engage with that. Like, oh yeah, I want to see if this person, Bonnie, agrees with me. Then if your next post says something like, should you cook on a pizza stone or on a pizza steel? When is stone the right answer? When is steel the right answer? Listen to today's podcast. We start this discussion at the 12-minute mark. You want to make it as easy as possible because funny enough, I've actually learning about pizza steel. We do pizza at our house every Friday night, and I was cooking on a pizza stone. And randomly, I've heard about pizza steels more than stones lately. So I've been kind of thinking about that. So if that popped up on my feed, you've made it so easy. Pizza stone versus pizza steel. That speaks directly to me. I'll click on it and then fast forward to the 12-minute mark. The goal is to get me to listen from 12 to 18, that 5-minute segment, talking about the pizza stone versus the pizza steel. And once I'm in, I'm probably not going to go away. So then if at minute 19, you start talking about sauce, I'm like, well, that kind of applies to me too. I make pizza every Friday night. I use jarred sauce, but if I want to make homemade sauce, let me listen to this. And then by the end of the episode, I'm like, oh, I like this pizza dude. I like this pot. Let me hit follow. And that's the trick, is make it as easy as possible for one specific person to discover your show and click through to it. And once you get them in, it's easier to get them to stay. It's just getting them through the door, right?
I have a lot of questions to ask you about this now. Okay. Yeah. So what you described in terms of that Instagram post, 3 to 5 bullets, guilty as charged, guilty as charged. And why is that? Because I want someone who wants to hear number 1 to listen, to hear number 2 to listen. What if they don't like 3? Maybe they'll like 4. Okay. So if we pick just one thing from that podcast, which I love your idea, then, and the graphic might be the graphic of you talking to the person. What does the graphic look like for the next one and the next one and the next one? And how often do you post those? Because you don't want your feed to have 5 different posts in a row from the same podcast, or do you?
Sure. Why not? Here's the thing that's so wild about all podcasters, not just you, but and I was guilty of it too. Podcasters they have the confidence and the ego to create a podcast and say the world needs to hear my voice, so I'm going to create a podcast. And 100% of them also say, well, I don't want to promote it too much because I don't want to overwhelm people. But if the former is true, right? Yeah. If the world deserves to hear your voice, why won't you also share that voice on social media as much as you can? And so a couple of thoughts on this that might help explain the answer. Number 1, about 6 months ago, my wife, Callie, because we were encouraging people, post more, and everybody has the same hesitation. Post more. So Callie looked at one of the most popular podcasts. I think it was Call Her Daddy. And she had I don't remember who the interview. Oh, is the Call Her Daddy interviewed Andy Cohen, the Real Housewives dude. And Callie went on either Instagram or TikTok, and from one 45-minute interview with Andy Cohen, there were 38 1-minute or less clips pulled from that, all published within the 3 days of that episode first coming out. Because, I mean, you could have stacked those up and watched the entire interview, I'm sure, without, ever actually watching the interview. But the reason is, it's not your followers that you need to be concerned about. It's all the other people who are going to discover it and put it out there. And if you use Instagram, I'm going to speak about something I don't totally know about. But look into running test reels. Have you heard of test reels?
No, I have not.
It's content that you can create and push out not to your followers. So you can create 10 reels from a podcast episode and put them all out in the world. And the people who follow you will be the ones who don't see it. And then what happens if one of them, the reason they do this is one of them takes off and goes viral and becomes great, then you can hit a button and publish it to your followers. It's so you don't inundate your followers with B and C level content. They only get the A level content. But it's a great way to push 10 clips out. So that's the first thing is, if you're confident enough to put the podcast out there, then tell people about it in the way that's going to drive the most engagement, because you owe that to yourself. The other thing that I'll share is, and by the way, all of this makes me uncomfortable as well. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, if you look at my Instagram account, I never post.
Which is what? Could you tell us your Instagram?
It's just my name. It's Jeff Dauler, but it's an occasional picture of, like, my kids doing something cute, or my dog lying in a sunbeam. I'm terrible at it because I'm like, who wants to hear from me? But every time I do post about podcasting, I get a couple messages. So I have to be better about it. So that's the one part, is just be confident enough in yourself to put those things out there, knowing that your goal is to reach as many of whoever you identified to the answer to question number 2, your goal is to reach those. So as long as you're talking directly to those people, that community will grow. The other thing is a real world example. I'm lying in bed a couple months ago, scrolling through Instagram, like, mindlessly. And this thing popped up, and the graphic said, you are probably taking your magnesium supplements wrong. And it was an Instagram post. And about 3 months prior, I started taking magnesium supplements every night before I went to bed. And I was like, what? So I click on it. I watched the minute and a half video, learned a couple things, affirmed that I was actually taking them right. So I felt good about myself. Then I hit the follow button, and then I just moved on to look for more, puppy videos or whatever. And then a couple days later, I get another post from this guy, and it was, if you're planning on getting pregnant within the next year, here is your prenatal regimen. And then I clicked on his page, and every single one of his posts, every one that he has, talks to just one person. He's a pharmacist out of Texas with over 1 million followers. His entire brand is talking to just one person. And he was so informative and so knowledgeable that it didn't bother me that he also said stuff about prenatal vitamins, or baldness, or menopause, or morning sickness, or anything that would never affect me. Hopefully no baldness, but nothing that would ever impact me. It didn't bother me that was always already up there, because the stuff that he was sharing for me was so spot on.
So, well, what you're saying is one person at a time. He spoke to one person at a time.
Yep.
And I think that what captured you when you look there is that he was considered to be an authority to you, a trusted authority.
I didn't even know his credentials. That's what's wild about it.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know he was a pharmacist. I knew nothing about him. I'm like, oh, guy on the internet. Okay. Which is crazy. But it's just the way it works, It's
also a little scary, from my professional perspective, as a dietitian. There are lots of people out there who give nutrition advice, these influencers who have more popularity than credibility. And even for them, occasionally they'll come up with something that's true, and attract people. And then sometimes they go off the rails. But I love what you said, because it really does make a difference in terms of finding people who are authorities.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question about reviews. Because when I buy something, I know that I read the reviews first, and I'll read the good ones, and I'll always go to the bad ones just to see what's going on with that. So how much do podcast reviews really matter? And how do you ask for them? Should you ask for them without sounding too needy?
And maybe I'm ignorant about this, but I don't know that I have ever read a podcast review before deciding to listen to a podcast. So in my opinion, the reviews on the podcast platforms don't matter at all. What would be more impactful to me, and a great way to get email addresses, right? Because to me, a podcast, the 30 minutes or 45 minutes or hour of audio that sits on the internet is probably the least important part of the podcast, right? The content that comes from just having a natural, friendly conversation, those are the gold bars. And then secondary to that is being able to build a community. And the only really way you can build a community, because people subscribe and follow to your podcast, you never know who they are. There's complete anonymity with that. So what you need to do is collect data from people. So any chance that you have to get an email from somebody who's a podcast listener, I say take it. So what I would recommend, and what I have recommended clients do, is say, hey, if you have listened to this podcast, and this goes back to the friction statement. Never ask people to pass judgment on the podcast before they share it or before they contact you. Don't say, if this podcast has improved your life, or if you know somebody who could benefit from this, because once you ask people to evaluate, they're going to default on the side of caution. So if I say, hey, if you're listening to this podcast about pizza and you know somebody who wants to make better pizza sauce, or you know somebody who is wondering if Chicago style or whatever, anything that causes evaluation, you're going to hit a hard stop with 90% of your listeners, because the last thing I want to do is send something to you, Bonnie, and say, hey, I know you've been making pizza and blah, blah, blah. It's too much, right? Instead, you just make it super simple. Hey, if you're listening to this podcast and you know someone who likes homemade pizza, actually, that's even too much. And you know someone who makes pizza at home, send them this episode. If they listen to it and they learn something, they're going to be forever grateful to you. If they don't listen to it, they're still going to think it's cool that you thought of them. You take away all the friction and you explain only the benefit. And you ask them to share it. So along the same lines, for reviews, when you're talking to people, when you're talking to your listeners, say, hey, I need emails from two types of people. One, if this is your first episode of this podcast that you've ever heard, will you send me an email and just tell me your thoughts, unfiltered? Just share your thoughts on this podcast. Good, bad, ugly, constructive, praise. I don't care what it is, but I only want to hear from people who are listening to their very first episode. Nobody else. Now, all of a sudden, you've just qualified all of your first-time listeners to feel like they're part of this is not just a generic, send me an email, right? And then the other thing you could do is, if you've been listening to this podcast and you've heard more than 10 entire episodes of this podcast, can you send me an email? I want to send you a 3-question survey about the show, but I only want to hear from people who've listened to more than 10 episodes. You've now made people feel special. Like, oh, I'm in an exclusive club. Not everybody can respond to this. I better respond, because she's asking for people just like me. So then when people respond and they send you their thing, then you have the survey is irrelevant. The fact that you now have their email address, that's what's magic. So now if you are releasing a book, doing a special episode of the podcast, whatever it is, you can reach out to them and tell them about it. The data is the real magic in a podcast.
That's a brilliant way to collect emails
Yeah.
because you're not really asking for much.
Right.
Really, you're not. You're not. And even if you didn't want to do the survey, even if you just said, if you've listened to 10 or more, I would love to know what else you'd like to hear about or something like that.
That to me, I'll cut you off there. Sorry to interrupt, but that to me is too much thinking because now the person has to say, oh, well, you know what? Well, she may have done that. They won't answer that because what if that topic existed in an episode they haven't heard yet? So all you want is their information. That's the value. The input is secondary, right?
So for the survey, what kind of questions would you ask in the survey? And don't you think that the survey is work?
Yeah, but they've opted into it. Now you get to write them a personal email. So if I'm listening to a podcast, it's, I realized this when I worked in radio for so long, going back to what I said at the beginning, everybody's multitasking. So you have to decide how to take the baby steps with the audience. So if you say to somebody, if you've listened to 10 or more episodes, can you just send me an email? Just put the word 10 in the subject line. I want to send you something. That's it. Now you've qualified a subset of your audience. You've created some intrigue and you've made it as easy. It couldn't be any easier. There's no thinking involved and people are going to be curious. So then they're going to send it. Then let's say you get 20 people, take a couple hours and write every single one of them a personal thank you note. Hey, Jeff, thank you so much. I can't believe I had over 20 people respond and say they've listened to this many episodes. So sometimes, I feel like that I do this podcast and nobody hears it. Thank you so much for being one. I'm just curious. Have you ever told someone else about this podcast? If you have, how did you describe it? If you haven't, how would you describe it? And now now they feel like you guys are friends. And now, but the most importantly, you have their email address. And the second layer of this is when I worked in radio, there were companies that managed email databases for radio stations, right? Because not only was there value to, talk to the listeners, because radio is the same as podcasting. You have no idea who's listening. So radio is the same as podcasting in that vein. So you have people who are, you have these companies who are just collecting email addresses. But then what they would do is they would just send an email out and they would go, hey, Bonnie, thanks again for, listening to all the hits Q100. We appreciate you being a listener. Completely random question. Just respond with yes or no. Do you own a cat? Thanks. And they would just, and this company, this business existed just to create demographic tags on people, right? So they would get your email address and now you're a pet owner, you're a cat owner. And then over time, eventually they have a list of like 5,000 people that they can go to PetSmart and go, hey, we know we have 5,000 cat owners in our database. And that's the whole reason they exist. On a much smaller level, do that with your podcast. So you ask people, hey, if you've listened to 10 or more episodes, send me an email with 10. Everybody who comes in, you put them in one list and you label them, hardcore listeners, 10 plus. And you send them an email every week. Say, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I appreciate you so much. If you have somebody who's it's their first time listening, well, you send them an email 2 weeks later and go, hey, have you checked out another episode? Here are the 2 episodes we've released since you last listened. That's how you grow. It's a lot of work, but that's how you grow and build an audience.
What you're talking about obviously is podcasting. That's why you call yourself the podcast architect, but it is so beyond that. Yeah. Because as you're talking, my mind is going and you're really talking about brand building and you're talking about extending your audience way beyond where it might be. Yeah. So I know that you have worked with brands and businesses. So let's talk about money for a minute because everybody wants to hear about money. And yeah. I'll admit that sometimes when I'm listening to a podcast, let's say sometimes like Mel Robbins or something, right. I'll just push fast forward when it gets to all the advertisements because I'm really not that interested. Occasionally there'll be something, but not really. But I know that they pay the bills. So when should a host start thinking about monetizing, and how do you make yourself attractive to a brand? And I know some of your answers to this because I read an old email of yours that was like beautiful. I mean, I loved what you said about monetization, but please share with us some of your thoughts about making money through podcasting.
The way Mel Robbins and Joe Rogan and Call Her Daddy and Dax Shepard and all of those podcasts make their money is great for them because they're doing 6 and 7 figure deals, right? And because they have the audience to support it. The last time I did the math, if a podcast had 10,000 listeners per episode, that's going to put it in the top 0.5% of podcast. Like nobody's got 10,000 listeners per episode consistently. If you do, you're an elite podcaster. Every commercial is going to put in your pocket probably about $175, which if your podcast is that big, it's probably taking up a lot. It's just not equitable. So I tell people to not think about making money in that way. Instead, I tell people to look at alignment and partnerships with companies that are adjacent to what you're going to be talking about. So if your podcast is about pizza, right? Then the best time to get an advertiser is before it even launches, because that's when you reach out to, Luigi's House of Mozzarella and you say, hey, Luigi, I'm going to launch a podcast about pizza. And here's what I want. I want one person to sponsor the first season of it's going to be 12 episodes long. Here's what I'm going to give you. Your name's going to be at the beginning of every episode. Hey, it's Jeff's Pizza Podcast brought to you by Luigi's House of Mozzarella. The best mozzarella on the planet is Luigi's, blah, blah, blah. And then, so that's cool. Then you're going to say to Luigi, I'm going to interview you on the podcast and it'll run as an episode, right? As a sponsored episode, but I'm also going to give you all of the raw footage so that your team can piece it together and create social media assets. Now, what people like us forget is that big companies, if they want to do a photo shoot or if they want to have a interview done or anything like that, it costs them tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to rent a set and get the people, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But if you've already got the camera and the Riverside account and the microphones and you're set up to do it and you make it look good and you ask the questions they want to answer, they'll buy that B-roll from you for $5,000, $10,000, and everything else becomes a bonus. So now they're interviewed on a podcast. They get to use that for social growth, on their own platforms. They get to say they're a part of this pizza podcast, which is a cool thing for a brand to do. And you don't have to worry, because once you start selling commercials based on how many people listen, you got to justify when your audience goes down. You've got to chase them, if you have. So you don't want to do that. So get somebody to underwrite the show and know that there's value beyond the real value exists beyond just the mentions on the show. It's the social media assets and the raw footage that's really going to be valuable to the people you partner with.
I really want to put a neon sign around what you just said, because it is the same thing for the media business and working with brands. And it's partnering with someone who will believe in you, no matter what your metrics are, no matter what the show has accumulated so far. And it doesn't always work that way. I know that there are many brands, for example, that want to partner with people who have tons of followers on social media because that's what they're looking for. But my career was really built with working with brands, and my social following was never anything like, those zillions and zillions of followers. but I knew how to get the brand's messages out. They knew that they could trust me. They knew that I had authority and trust. And that was what they were looking for. And those were the brands that I really respected. And I worked with many brands for years, 10 years, 15 years. And, that makes a big difference. So I think that finding a loyal brand that you could loyally work with really could make a huge difference. And it's not that, you have to be looking for 20 different brands to sponsor your podcast. It's really just finding one, especially if you're starting out small, that could really make a big difference for you and for them.
And here's an idea that it's just kind of bouncing around in my head, that I have not brought to life, and it's somebody else is doing it. I was on a call with a potential client, and they have over 1,000 podcast episodes, and every episode is an interview. And so they've done over 1,000 interviews, and they were asking about monetization, and they've got they have about 25,000 downloads per episode, but I don't think they have any ads running in it. I think they just had like automated ads, which don't pay as much. So they were making a little bit of money. And I asked them what the purpose of the podcast was. And they said the podcast makes money because every guest that's on their show pays between $500 and $1,200 to be interviewed on the podcast. So at 100% of their guests is paying $500 to $1,200. So do the math. I mean, they've got 1,000 guests. Is that 5 million? I think that's 5 million. I'm bad at math.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. Hold on. I want to do that math. It's a lot of money, but here's why they're doing it. It's 500 times 1,000. 500,000. So $500,000. So only $500,000.
Not so bad.
Right. But it's between $500,000 and $1 million, depending on how much everybody paid. The reason that all of these people are paying it is because the package that they get is, hey, you get interviewed, but we'll also put you on our 2 or 3 websites with all this SEO backlink stuff. We'll give you these social media assets. We'll promote you to our network. And, they've built up a mailing list of 10,000 people and all this. So all of those guests aren't buying the podcast interview. They're buying all of the social proof that comes around it.
Yeah.
So I think there might be a business model for somebody like you who has your business, doing the media training and doing that, to run parallel, because you already have the experience and the confidence in front of the camera and behind the microphone and the infrastructure that you could say, here's my podcast, but here's my other podcast. And this podcast just exists to interview people, to give them legitimacy, to give them backlinks, to give them content. And that could be and then that funds the other podcast that you do.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. So what do you think is coming up for podcasts in the future? The landscape keeps shifting. What do you think is next for hosts that we should be preparing for?
Don't freak out about video. Like Apple has just added video podcasting, and keep in mind, I'm biased. I come from 2.5 decades working in radio. The beautiful thing about podcasting is you get to listen to it while you're walking your dog or loading the dishwasher or mowing the lawn or lying on the couch with your AirPods in. You don't have to engage with it visually. And I think that's the beautiful thing about podcasting. But all these platforms want the visual because of the ad dollars associated with it, which don't directly flow to you. So if you want to do a video podcast, go for it. But don't feel like the only way to podcast is video. So that's number one. Number two, but you do have to have a video presence, especially on YouTube, because it's the number 2 search engine on the planet, right? So that leads me to number two. Number two is, I think shorter form content is going to be king in 2026 and 2027. Like when TikTok showed up a couple years ago, everything became 30 seconds and 1 minute long, quick little dances and all that, whatever. And then those slowly expanded to like 2 or 3 minutes. I think the sweet spot where everybody is going to land in the next couple of years is 5 to 7 minutes of content. Deep enough and robust enough that you can really learn and engage something and feel a relationship with the host, but not so quick that you're like, your brain is rotting because you're like, what is that? Like think of everybody, oh, look, a panda fell out of a tree. Oh, look, there's a person doing a dance. Oh, look, there's a, baby riding his bike for the first time. It's all this fun stuff. People are going to want longer form, but they're not going to want to commit to a 30 or 40 minute show. So structure your longer shows in 5-minute chapters so that when you post it to YouTube, when you create it, you can just take this chunk and you plan your podcast in advance to have 2 or 3 or 4 5-minute long chunks. You pull them out and you post those separately on YouTube. I think that's where the magic is going to happen.
Well, it's, funny that you say that, because when I first started my podcast, I only had guests and we always did about an hour of an interview. And that was going really well. But then what happened was someone that I was doing media training with asked me a question and she was having this problem. And I thought, you know what, this is such a good thing to talk about. I'm just going to talk about it for 20 minutes, just myself. Yeah. And I saw that was a really popular show. And then I decided to do every other show a guest and every other show 20 minutes. And then again, so I thought, you know what? I had this thought. And then I did a show for 5 minutes and that was amazing. So, yes. And people were like writing to me about it. I had the same issue, that kind of thing. So I agree with you. And I also I love doing those interviews because then it's just me. It's a lot less prep. I don't even do a video for those interviews. I just do audio for those. But I am glad that is a trend, because I do think that you're right. People like Cliff Notes, they just like the shorter versions.
But they want it to be long enough that they feel like they actually got something out of it, right? Yes. So yes. I think that's where, if you have expertise and knowledge like you do, and the hard part about people like us and anybody who's listening to this or watching this and is an expert in some area, all of us take our own wisdom kind of for granted because it's second nature to us. So when I talk to somebody about a podcast, I have, ideas and thoughts and strategies, and it just comes, it comes as naturally to me as, putting my seatbelt on when I sit in a car. It's just what I do. But to somebody who doesn't have that experience and that knowledge, those are little like nuggets. Those are like, gold bars or Easter eggs filled with the best candy. So if you can come up with a way to take the stuff that seems basic and obvious to you and put it into a 5 to 10 minute podcast episode, you're going to have a huge audience for that. Yeah. Huge audience for that.
So Jeff, my last question is one that I ask all my guests. And if you could send a message to your younger self, what would that be?
Buy Bitcoin and Amazon stock. I had a guy, I'm only half joking with that because I had a guy, a friend, it's one of my good friends, it's her ex-husband, and he used to get a couple beers in when we were hanging out, and he would say, "Did you buy any Bitcoin yet?" And then he would explain on this level that I can't even comprehend, like blockchain and this and that and all that. And I remember him telling me when Bitcoin was like $10,000 or $15,000, he's like, "You don't have to buy a whole coin. You could go just invest $5,000 and get a third of a coin." And I was like, all right, maybe I'll do that. Never did anything with it. And then, I don't know what it's at today. I know it went up and down, but I'm like, I bet that dude is so rich, so rich.
Yeah. It's funny. So I asked this question to one of my guests, Carolyn O'Neill, and her answer was buy Apple.
Yeah, buy Apple stock. That's funny.
So I am going to put you on the spot a little bit and ask you something that I have never asked another guest.
Okay.
And could you please give my outro to this podcast?
What do you mean? Explain.
I mean, like usually I say now, okay, thank you so much for listening today. Thank you to Jeff.
Oh, okay. Like try to do the outro in the way
Yeah, because I now I know, like I shouldn't say, hey, please write a review. Hey, please this.
Okay. So here's what I would say is, here's something that we've just started talking about clients to do, because when you get to the end of a podcast episode, it's over, and it's either going to roll into another episode of yours, or your listeners are just going to be drifted. And then you have to hope that the next episode is intriguing to them, right? So is there any episode in your library or any guest you've had on talking about anything that's similar to what we just talked about? Like podcasting or social media or?
Yes, of course. Sure.
Okay. Who's a guest that comes to mind talking about one of those, or an episode that comes to mind?
I mean, even Don Jackson Blattner.
Okay. What was that subject matter?
We talked about getting into media, but I think it was more like media in general.
Okay. So the way that I think everybody, this is brand new, by the way. So this is a great question to ask me, because I just had this epiphany like last week. Every podcast should end with, hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. Hope you got some value out of this episode. I have done X number of shows. This is my 120th episode of this podcast. And in that time, I've interviewed some incredible people. What was the woman's name? Don
Jackson Blattner. Yeah, Blattner.
If you liked this episode, I'll bet you'll like the episode with Don Jackson Blattner. Go back, take a listen to that episode. I think it's in the same vein as this one. And if this is your very, very first time listening, that would be a great episode that's going to give you a same taste of what we just talked about. If you're a longtime listener, you may have already heard that episode. So you might want to check out one of my favorites, which is, what's your favorite? What's the favorite episode you've ever done?
Let's say this one.
Well, you can't. We've just listened to that one. So, but by wrapping up your show, by personally inviting people to go listen to hand-selected other episodes, to me is such a no-brainer, and I can't believe I didn't think about it before last week. So that's how I would wrap up everything. And then I would also do something that gets people to send you their email address. So it would just end with, hey, if you want, I'm going to take these show notes, and I'm going to, from these show notes, create a list of Jeff's top 5 tips that he gave. If you want me to email that to you, just send an email to me and put podcast in the subject line, and I'll make sure you have that within 24 hours. Thanks for listening. That's how I would end. That's how I would end every single episode, because now you take away friction. Like, people are like, oh my gosh, if they're thinking this is such a great episode and they've stayed to the end, then the 2 things that you should do is you've got them to the end to say, hey, I've summarized this whole episode for you. I'll send it to you. And guess what? ChatGPT can do that. Claude can do that. Dump in the transcript and go, hey, summarize all of Jeff's tips. That's number 1. And then number 2 is, so you capture their email address. And then number 2 is tell them what content you've already created that they're going to like because they like this one. So thanks for letting me brainstorm that.
I love that.
Close.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, I have done that in the middle of my shows where I say, oh, and you know what?
Brilliant.
If you want a little bit more on this, I've already talked about pitching in episode number.
Yes. Brilliant.
And usually I do the episode number, just in case someone was out walking and they won't remember the person's name. They could remember episode number 24. Yep. So I have done that many times, and I have to look at my own shows because I don't remember. I know the person, but I don't remember the episode number.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, it has been a pleasure.
Awesome.
And you know what? What's so interesting about this episode is I have never talked to Jeff before. I never saw him before. I don't even remember how did we even connect? Do you know?
Probably. I have cold emails going out. I have cold LinkedIn DM things going out. So hopefully one of those resonated with you and got you to respond.
That sure did. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, I'll put all this in the show notes, but what is the best place? And could you spell your last name?
Yeah, just send me an email, jeff@1022.com. And 1022 is all one word, all spelled out, TENTWENTYTWO.com. And my last name is spelled Dauler, and you can find me. I'm usually most active on LinkedIn, unless you want to see two of the cutest little girls on the planet, then go to my Instagram. But LinkedIn is a great way to get in touch also.
Okay. And notice what he did there is asking for your email address, but it's worth it. Trust me, It's worth it. Well, thank you, really, truly, thank you for being on my show. And I hope that we stay in touch. I'm sure that we will. Thank you for listening today, my media savvy peeps. And by the way, you are looking mighty media savvy today. So keep up the good work and we will chat soon. Till next time. Bye.